Hello, I'm Jason Turvey of the Class Consciousness Project, and welcome to the latest in our series of bulletins updating you on class struggle in Britain and across the world. We've been away for a couple of weeks, so it's a bumper edition this week as we have a lot to cover. So, we start our bulletin in the NHS, where consultants have taken part in strike action this week in their dispute over pay. Their strike action follows the action taken by junior doctors last week in their pay dispute, and both groups of workers are members of the British Medical Association, who are calling for a full restoration of pay, which they say had been cut by some 26%, while consultants have said they aren't just striking for better pay, but for the future of their profession. The BMA claim that unless action is taken, there will be a mass exodus of doctors from the profession and from the country as the NHS creaks from decades of privatisation and budget cuts by governments of both colours, and pay rises have been outstripped by inflation for 15 years. They've also been less than impressed with health ministers, who have met them only once and not at all since the doctors voted in favour of strike action. They also took part in a protest in London, which included speakers like Mick Lynch of the RMT. And staying with the RMT, their members across 14 train operating companies took part in 2 more days of strike action this week in their long-standing dispute over pay. Their strike action, which has taken place on the 20th and the 22nd of July and will happen again on the 29th of July, will disrupt travellers across the country as schools wind down for the summer holidays. Both RMT and ASLEF, the train drivers' union, have made plain that this dispute is between them and the government, because the train operating companies have been essentially run directly by the state since the COVID pandemic began over 3 years ago. So the failure of the government to resolve this dispute reflects pretty badly on them. Meanwhile, RMT have announced that they have suspended their planned strike action on London Underground. Members were due to cause an entire week of disruption starting on Sunday the 23rd of July, but RMT Assistant General Secretary John Leach announced via YouTube on the 21st of July that talks at ACAS over the last 2 weeks, and having received some assurances from London Underground's management on proposed changes to drivers' agreements, attendance at work procedures, station staff reorganisation and, vitally, the pension fund, RMT have suspended their action but remain in dispute while talks continue at ACAS. And in one last railway story before we move on, the campaign to fight the government's proposals to close over 1,000 ticket offices across the country is reaching a crescendo as the frankly inadequate 21-day public consultation period on the proposed closures comes to an end on July the 26th. It means that after Monday the 24th of July, responses should be sent online. So go to the RMT's website where you'll find all the details for contacting the train operating companies and raise your objections. Protests have been taking place across the country against the proposals, which will cost around 2,000 jobs and make the journeys of so many travellers much more difficult. Now, you'll recall from a previous class struggle update that Unite members at homeless charity St Mungo's began an all-out strike in their fight for a pay rise. Well, it turns out that the workers at St Mungo's have not only a battle on their hands against the management of the charity, but officials from their own union. Unite officials had proposed to take an electronic ballot of members on whether they should return to work, but they rejected this proposal with a heavy majority. Unite officials claimed that a pause should be taken in their strike action to take account of a recent court ruling which restores the ban on bosses from using agency workers as strike cover. The ruling, which was made in the High Court on the 13th of July, came after 13 trade unions brought a legal challenge to a government decision last year to legalise employment agencies supplying strike cover, which the then Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng claimed would remove what he called burdensome 1970s style restrictions. Members were rightly worried that any return to work could break the momentum that the strike action had built up, especially given that the strikes are as much about pay as they are about the recalcitrant managers and trustees at St Mungo's. The workers also believe that the High Court ruling won't stop St Mungo's recruiting agency staff, as the organisation is carrying a large number of vacancies for positions across the organisation that can be legally filled by agency staff, even during strike action. For now, it looks like the workers are firmly in charge of their strike action, but they must remain vigilant against the desires of their trade union bureaucracy to curtail and truncate their action. Now, a serious health and safety issue has been raised by the Fire Brigades Union, which can have serious implications for its members across the country. The FBU has issued a circular to its members regarding the use of breathing apparatus in response to a proposal from the National Fire Chiefs Council to change the procedure under which firefighters don and activate their breathing apparatus. Currently, firefighters check and switch on their safety equipment at what is called the bridgehead, the point beyond which the safety of the air is not guaranteed. The National Fire Chiefs Council has proposed that firefighters dealing with high-rise fires could pass the bridgehead without their breathing apparatus checked and operating. The NFCC says that this change will mean that firefighters can advance further into dangerous areas in the event of a fire. But the FBU say that this change will risk the lives of both firefighters and the victims of fires. The FBU have dedicated a page on their website to this vitally important issue, and there's a link to it in the description to this video. In Scotland, staff working at a Ministry of Defence depot in North Ayrshire, which manufactures missiles, are striking in a dispute over bonuses. Members of the GMB union who work at Defence Munitions, which is part of the MOD, voted overwhelmingly to strike and will walk out on Monday the 24th of July. GMB stated that workers were agreed at the two-tier structure at the depot, whereby managers and craft workers receive bonuses while non-craft workers don't. Some workers at the depot are paid just £10.42 an hour, and their strike could threaten the supply lines of missiles, particularly to the front line of the NATO proxy war in Ukraine. Turning now to the ongoing teacher strikes, and there's a good chance that Rishi Sunak's pay offer to settle the dispute isn't getting much traction amongst rank and file members. The offer, which was recommended by the School Teachers Review Body and backed by the bureaucracies of the major teaching unions, will be paid for from existing budgets, meaning that the government will not fund the proposed pay rise but expect local education authorities and head teachers to make cuts in other areas to make ends meet. It's understood that local branches of the National Education Union, who have been leading on this dispute from the beginning, intend to reject the offer, partly because it was not properly funded, but also because they believe that Rishi Sunak's idea of a solution won't fix the fundamental problems which beset the teaching profession, including problems retaining teachers and the fact that school resourcing has been so underfunded for so long that the profession is now in terminal decline. Mary Bousted of the NEU was typically defeatist when questioned by The Guardian, saying that to reject this offer will mean that further strike action will have to follow and that the government will not budge on their current offer. Teachers will need to take the example of St Mungo's dispute and lead strike action from the ground and not rely on trade union bureaucrats to take the lead. We'll look now at Amazon, where GMB workers at Amazon's Coventry fulfilment centre have taken 20 days of strike action in their dispute over pay and union recognition. They've now been joined by their GMB colleagues in Rugeley in the West Midlands, where 86% of workers voted to back strike action in their own dispute over pay and union rights. Amazon around the world takes millions of dollars in taxpayer subsidy, yet pays its workers rates of pay barely above the minimum wage and is brutal in its treatment of workers who try to unionise. GMB will organise the strike action at only the second British Amazon fulfilment centre. Now, we turn to Royal Mail, where on the 11th of July the Communication Workers Union announced via a YouTube live stream that over 75% of its members in Royal Mail had voted in favour of accepting the dreadful offer which the union's leadership had recommended for acceptance back in April, so ending the dispute which had been running since last year, and members had sacrificed some £1,400 in wages each in strike action. CWU members in Royal Mail took part in strike action in May of 2022, then followed this up with further strike action throughout the rest of the year in support of their pay claim and the employers' attempts to erode their terms and conditions and attach unattainable targets as conditions on pay rises. They were joined by their CWU colleagues in BT, who took part in their first strike action since 1987, as well as members in Crown Post offices who were making their own claim for a decent pay rise. But 2022's action was in stark contrast to that in 2023, where the CWU bureaucracy failed to call their members out in Royal Mail for a single day of strike action, despite voting by nearly 96% on a 77% turnout to renew their mandate for strike action in February. Negotiations continued until the CWU leadership presented an offer to their members which was way below inflation included a portion of a pay rise which had already been imposed by the management, and gave no guarantees that any of the CWU members who had faced disciplinary action for alleged conduct issues would have these charges dropped or be reinstated to their jobs. The actions of the CWU in 2023 clearly killed all the momentum which workers had built up in 2022, and despite a brave fight by a collection of rank and file members to reject the deal, members had clearly seen that the writing was on the wall and voted to accept the crumbs from the table that Royal Mail had offered them. This from a company which made over £1 billion in profits in the 2 years leading up to the start of this dispute. Then, within days of the defeat of the post workers being confirmed, Royal Mail went into action. This letter, posted to social media by a postal worker, confirms that workers who were on an attendance review would have their reviews extended by 6 months as a result of changes made to the attendance management policy during those pay negotiations. In the CWU's document, published in April, when they recommended the rotten deal to their members, they said that sick pay, standards and ill health retired, whilst less favourable than the current arrangements, are materially better than the employer's original proposals. This is the evidence of that less favourable agreement which the CWU negotiators accepted. The CWU central office then responded, writing to union branches to state that they did not agree to the publication of a fact sheet on the new standards and would take part in a workshop with senior Royal Mail management on the 21st of July to agree transitional standards. Now, what was said on Friday and what was agreed isn't clear, but what is clear is that this is a wretched deal that has very real ramifications for the CWU members who supported each other through months of industrial strife, only to be let down by their own leadership. So what should happen now? While there's been Royal Mail workers who've left the CWU already, and many others who are considering what to do next, we at the Class Consciousness Project would encourage members to stay in their union but build a rank and file movement that can change the CWU into a member-led union. Now, one good place to start is to connect with the Posties Say No campaign, which is a grassroots campaign who actively encourage members to reject the dreadful offer Royal Mail made, which the CWU leaders recommended for acceptance. They released an excellent statement on July the 11th after the result of the ballot came in, and I'll quote from it directly. Staying in also means ensuring that the experience of the last year is never repeated. That means building at the grassroots, holding members' meetings, electing reps and building workplace committees, holding branches to account. It means coming together to build a rank and file alternative that can give a new direction to our union and ultimately a new fighting leadership. And I couldn't agree more. We have covered the capitulation of the CWU leadership in 2 articles published in April and July, so please go to our website and take a look. Turning to international struggle now, and the Writers Guild of America have been making the headlines in recent weeks with their first strike action since 2007. The Guild, which represents 11,500 screenwriters, went on strike in May after talks to agree a new contract collapsed after settlement could not be reached on compensation for writing for streaming services like Netflix and Prime Video and the use of artificial intelligence in writing scripts. To make matters worse for an industry mired in issues including falling quality and falling income, the writers were joined by the Screen Actors Guild American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, who have taken strike action for the first time since 1980. For the actors, the dispute revolves around what are called residuals, additional payments made to artists for work already recorded, such as voiceover work. Legacy television outlets have their own payment models for residuals, but streaming services do not, and the proliferation of the streaming sector in the last 10 years has brought the situation to a point where artists are demanding residuals for streaming work. They're also very concerned about the use of AI in television and film production to create likenesses of actors without compensation. Movies and television programmes have already used likenesses of actors in their productions, even actors who have passed away, like Peter Cushing's likeness as Grand Moff Tarkin from Star Wars being used in 2016's Star Wars film Rogue One, when the actor sadly passed away in 1994. The actors have demanded an 11% pay rise, but have only been offered a 5% pay rise by the AMPTP, the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers, which has been in existence for almost 100 years and whose logo features in the credits of every TV show and film to come out of America. The fact that these two groups of very closely associated workers who have different but aligned disputes have come together to fight their employers hopefully bodes well for a swift and satisfactory resolution. However, Joe Biden's support for the workers could mean that he'll ram through some legislation and impose a deal on them all like he did with the railway workers. And that wraps up our bulletin. But if you're involved in a dispute that you think we should get to know about, get in touch with us at classconsciousnessproject@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at classconsciousnessproject.blog. You can also find us on Telegram, on Twitter, on Instagram and on Facebook. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Solidarity.